I spent 4 years mopping the hallways of Westfield University, watching my son David walk past me like I was invisible. Every morning at 5 a.m., I'd arrive before the students stirred, pushing my cleaning cart through the marble corridors where future doctors, lawyers, and business people slept soundly in their dorms. The chemical smell of floor cleaner became my perfume. The squeak of my cartwheels became my music. And the averted eyes of my own son became my daily heartbreak. It started small. Freshman year, David would still wave when he saw me in the dining hall, give me a quick hug before hurrying off to class. By sophomore year, the waves became nods. By junior year, the nods became nothing at all, and by senior year, I had become a ghost in his life, a woman in a gray uniform who happened to share his last name but whom he pretended not to know. I told myself it was normal. He was growing up, finding himself, becoming the man I always dreamed he'd be. But deep down, in the quiet moments when I scrubbed toilets in the faculty bathroom or emptied trash bins from lecture halls, I knew the truth. My son was ashamed of me. The breaking point came 3 weeks before graduation. I was cleaning the hallway outside the student center when I heard his voice, that familiar laugh that used to fill our tiny apartment with joy. He was with his friends, 3 boys in expensive jackets and designer sneakers, the kind of kids who'd never wondered where their next meal was coming from. "Is that your mom?" one of them asked, pointing at me. I froze, my hands gripping the mop handle. Our eyes met for just a second. I saw him calculate, weighing his options, choosing between the truth and his carefully constructed image. "No," he said, his voice flat. "I don't know her." The mop slipped from my hands and clattered against the floor. None of them turned around. They just kept walking, their laughter echoing down the hallway like a slap across my face. I stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. My hands were shaking. My eyes burned, but I wouldn't let the tears fall. Not here. Not where students could see the janitor crying and wonder what was wrong with her. I picked up the mop, finished my shift, and went home to our apartment, the same small 2-bedroom we'd lived in since David was born. That night, I sat at our kitchen table and looked at the photographs on the wall. David at 6, gap-toothed and grinning, hugging me after his first soccer game. David at 12, standing proudly beside me at his middle school science fair where his volcano project won 3rd place. David at 16, the day I told him I'd saved enough for his college application fees, his eyes wet with grateful tears. When had that boy disappeared? When had my son become someone who could look me in the eye and deny my existence? I thought about calling him, demanding an explanation, asking how he could do this to me after everything I'd sacrificed. But I didn't, because I knew what he'd say. The same things he'd been saying for months in the subtle ways children hurt their parents. The apologetic smiles when I showed up to campus events in my work clothes. The quick changes of subject when his roommates asked about his family. The increasingly rare visits home, always with an excuse about studying or club meetings or anything that meant he didn't have to be seen with me. So, instead of calling, I made a decision. A cold, clear decision that settled in my chest like ice. If David wanted to pretend I didn't exist, fine, but graduation was coming. And on that day, in front of everyone he was trying to impress, he was going to learn exactly who his mother was. I need to tell you how we got here. How a woman who once had dreams of her own ended up pushing a mop through halls where her son studied. How love can turn into something that looks like revenge but is really just a mother teaching her child the hardest lesson of all. David's father, James, died when David was 4. Brain aneurysm. One moment he was laughing at breakfast. The next he was on the floor and I was screaming into the phone for an ambulance that arrived too late. The life insurance barely covered the funeral. We lost the house 6 months later. I had been an accountant before David was born, had a good job at a mid-sized firm downtown. But when James died, I couldn't hold it together. The numbers that used to make sense turned into meaningless figures on a page. I'd stare at spreadsheets and see only my husband's face. After 3 months of missed deadlines and tear-stained reports, my boss gently suggested I take some time off. That time off became permanent. For 2 years, I worked retail, clothing stores, grocery stores, anywhere that would hire a woman with gaps in her resume and sadness in her eyes. David grew up in break rooms and back offices, doing homework on upturned cardboard boxes while I folded shirts or stocked shelves. He never complained. He was such a good boy, patient, and understanding beyond his years. When he was 12, he came home from school with a flyer. "Mom," he said, his eyes bright with possibility, "there's this program for kids who do well in school. They help you get into good colleges." I looked at the flyer, at the requirements and the promises and the dreams it represented. "Baby," I said carefully, "those programs are for families who can afford—" "It's free," he interrupted. "It's completely free. They just want kids who work hard." He got into the program, spent his middle school and high school years in special classes, summer programs, SAT prep courses, and he worked. God, how that boy worked. While his friends played video games and hung out at the mall, David studied. He studied like it was his job, like his life depended on it, because in a way, it did. When the acceptance letter came from Westfield University, we both cried. It was a good school, a respected school, the kind of place where futures were made. But the scholarship only covered tuition. Room, board, books, fees, that was on us. I looked at our savings account. The number was laughable. I looked at David, at the hope and terror warring on his face, and I made a choice. "I'll figure it out," I told him. "You just focus on school. I'll handle the rest." The job listing at Westfield was for overnight janitorial staff. The pay was decent, better than retail, and it came with one crucial benefit: a tuition reduction program for employees' children. It would take a year of work before David qualified, which meant his freshman year would drain most of our savings, but after that we'd manage. I didn't tell David where I was working at first, just said I'd found a better job, was working nights. He was so consumed with his own transition to college life that he didn't ask questions. The first time he saw me on campus, 3 weeks into his freshman year, I was emptying trash in the library. His face went through a series of emotions: surprise, confusion, and then something that looked like embarrassment. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "Working, baby. I told you I got a new job. But you're a janitor?" "It's honest work," I said, keeping my voice steady. "And it helps pay for your school." He looked around nervously, checking if anyone he knew was nearby. "Does it have to be here? Couldn't you work somewhere else?" That should have been my warning. That should have been the moment I sat him down and reminded him where he came from, who had raised him, what sacrifices meant. But I was tired. Bone tired from scrubbing toilets all night and trying to sleep during the day, so I just smiled and said, "This is where the job is, honey. Don't worry about it. You focus on your studies." Over the next 4 years, I watched my son transform. He joined the business fraternity, started wearing polo shirts with little logos on them, began talking about networking and brand management and opportunities. He made friends with kids whose parents were doctors and lawyers and executives, kids who summered in the Hamptons and wintered in Aspen, kids who had never pushed a mop or worried about a light bill or understood what the word sacrifice truly meant. And slowly, imperceptibly, he started pulling away. It wasn't dramatic. There was no fight, no confrontation, just a gradual distancing, like watching someone walk away from you in slow motion. The weekly calls home became bi-weekly, then monthly. The visits during breaks became shorter, always cut off with some excuse about meeting up with friends. And when we did talk, he spoke about his life in careful terms, editing out anything that might require him to explain me. I told myself I understood. He was building a life, creating opportunities I'd never had. This was what I wanted for him, wasn't it? For him to escape the poverty that had defined my existence, to become something more? But understanding didn't make it hurt less. Every time he walked past me in the hallway without acknowledgement, every time I heard him laugh with his friends and knew I wasn't part of that joy, every time I saw him ashamed of the very person who made his life possible, it was like losing him all over again. Like watching James die, but in slow motion, one small denial at a time. The night after he claimed not to know me, I barely slept. I kept replaying the moment, hearing him say I don't know her in that casual, dismissive tone, as if I were truly a stranger. As if he hadn't grown in my body, hadn't nursed at my breast, hadn't spent the first 18 years of his life under my care. I went to work the next night like always, punched in at 10 p.m., grabbed my cart, started my rounds. But something was different. I wasn't sad anymore. I was angry. Not the hot, explosive anger that burns out quick. The cold kind. The kind that calculates and plans and waits for the perfect moment. I was cleaning the administrative offices when I saw it. A flyer on the bulletin board about graduation, student speakers, award ceremonies, special recognitions. And at the bottom, a note. If you know an outstanding employee who has gone above and beyond, please submit a nomination for the President's Service Award. I stared at that flyer for a long time. Then I took a photo of it with my phone. Over the next 2 weeks, I did something I'd never done before. I started talking to people. Not just the other janitors, but the professors whose offices I cleaned, the administrators whose trash I emptied, the security guards who worked the night shift with me. I told them my story. Not for pity, but because I realized something. David might be ashamed of me, but other people weren't. Professor Chen, no relation, despite the shared name, in the economics department remembered me bringing David to work when he was young. He used to sit in my office while you cleaned, she said. Such a smart boy. Always reading. I used to give him books from my shelf. Dean Hartwell, who oversaw student affairs, stopped me in the hallway one night. "Margaret," he said, and something in his voice made me pause. "I heard about your son, the one graduating this year." "Yes, sir. I also heard what happened. About him pretending not to know you." My face burned. "I don't know what you—" "Margaret." He put a hand on my shoulder. 20 years ago, I was a janitor too. Worked nights at a hospital while I finished my degree. My daughter was ashamed of me then. Took me years to understand that it wasn't about me. It was about her fear of being judged. "That doesn't make it right," I said quietly. "No," he agreed. "It doesn't. But it makes it human." He paused. "I'd like to do something. For graduation, if you'll let me." "What kind of something?" He smiled. "Trust me." I did trust him. Maybe because he understood in a way most people couldn't. Maybe because I was tired of fighting alone. Or maybe because deep down I knew this was exactly what David needed. Not punishment, but perspective. The weeks leading up to graduation were strange. I went through my normal routine, but there was a sense of anticipation now, a feeling that something important was coming. David and I barely spoke. He was busy with final exams and senior week activities. I was busy with work and with the quiet preparations that Dean Hartwell and I were making. 3 days before graduation, David came home for dinner. It was rare enough that I almost didn't recognize the knock on the door. "Hi, Mom," he said, standing in the doorway like a stranger asking for directions. "David." I stepped aside to let him in. "This is a surprise. I know I haven't been around much." He sat at the kitchen table, in the same chair he'd occupied since childhood. "I wanted to talk before graduation." My heart started pounding. Was this it? Was he finally going to acknowledge what he'd done, apologize, explain? "I wanted to ask you not to come to the ceremony." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What?" "It's going to be really crowded," he said quickly, not meeting my eyes. "Hard to find parking. And the seats are limited, mostly for parents who donated to the university. It would just be uncomfortable for you. I thought maybe we could celebrate after, just the two of us. Somewhere nice." I sat down across from him, looked at this young man who had my eyes and his father's jawline, and absolutely none of the character I thought I'd instilled in him. "You don't want me there because you're embarrassed," I said. It wasn't a question. "Mom, that's not—" "You told your friends you don't know me, David. I heard you." His face went pale. "I didn't mean—" It was complicated. They were asking questions and I just— "You denied me." My voice was steady, eerily calm. "Your father died so you could have a better life. I worked 3 jobs so you could eat. I took this position cleaning up after kids who have everything you never did so you could go to this school. And you looked your friends in the eye and said you don't know me." "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I just wanted to fit in. I wanted to be like them. I didn't want to be the poor kid with the janitor mom. I wanted to be someone they respected." And you thought denying me would make them respect you? He didn't answer. We sat in silence for a long moment. I'll be at your graduation, I said finally. You don't have to sit with me. You don't have to introduce me to your friends. You don't even have to acknowledge that you know me. But I'll be there, because that's what mothers do. We show up, even when we're not wanted. He left shortly after. Didn't finish the dinner I'd made. Just mumbled another apology and walked out, leaving me alone in the apartment with too much food and a heart that felt like it had been wrung out like a wet rag. But I wasn't sad anymore. I was resolved, because sometimes love means letting people face the consequences of their choices. And David was about to learn that lesson in front of everyone he'd been trying to impress. Graduation day dawned bright and clear. Perfect weather for sitting outside in folding chairs and pretending to be someone you're not. I got dressed carefully that morning. Not in my work uniform, but in the nicest outfit I owned, a simple navy dress I'd worn to James's funeral 20 years ago, paired with shoes I'd polished until they gleamed. I did my hair, put on makeup, added the pearl earrings my mother had left me. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a janitor. I saw a woman with dignity. The ceremony was held on the main lawn, rows and rows of white folding chairs, facing a stage decorated with the university's colors. I arrived early, found a seat in the middle section, not too close but not in the back either. Parents and families filled in around me, everyone dressed in their best, carrying flowers and cameras and pride. I watched as the graduates filed in, a sea of black robes and mortarboards. I spotted David easily, 5th row, 3rd from the right. He was looking around nervously, probably searching for his friends' families, anyone important who might further his networking. The ceremony began with the usual speeches. The valedictorian talked about future and opportunity. The board chair discussed legacy and tradition. I barely heard them. My hands were folded in my lap, my heart beating steady and strong, waiting. Then Dean Hartwell took the podium. Before we proceed with conferring degrees, he said, his voice carrying across the lawn, I'd like to take a moment to recognize someone special. Every year, we give the President's Service Award to an employee who embodies the values of Westfield University: dedication, sacrifice, and service to others. I felt people around me shift, wondering who would be honored. On stage, David was checking his phone, barely paying attention. This year's recipient, Dean Hartwell, continued, has worked at Westfield for 4 years. She arrives at 5 a.m. every morning, before most of you are awake, and leaves long after you've gone to bed. She cleans your classrooms, maintains your facilities, and ensures that this campus remains a place of beauty and learning. But what many of you don't know is why she took this job in the first place. Now David was listening. I saw his head snap up, his body go rigid. Margaret Chen became a janitor at Westfield University so her son could afford to attend. She worked overnight shifts while taking online courses to finish her accounting degree, a degree she'd abandoned 20 years ago when her husband died suddenly, leaving her alone with a 4-year-old son. The crowd had gone completely silent. I could see parents turning to look at each other, students whispering. During her 4 years here, Margaret has not only excelled at her job, but has also mentored other staff members, organized a food drive for students facing food insecurity, and tutored ESL students in the evening, all while working full-time and being a single mother. David's face had gone from white to red. Even from my seat, I could see his hands shaking. But perhaps most impressively, Dean Hartwell said, his voice taking on a different quality, Margaret never once asked for recognition, never complained about the difficulty of her situation, and never, ever stopped believing in her son, even when he stopped believing in himself. He paused, letting those words sink in. Margaret Chen, would you please come to the stage? Every head in that audience turned. 3,000 people looking for the janitor who had sacrificed everything. And there I was, sitting in the middle section in my navy dress and pearl earrings, standing up with as much grace as I could muster. The walk to the stage felt like miles. Parents were standing now, applauding. Professors I'd cleaned for were clapping. Students I'd never spoken to were on their feet. And David was still sitting, frozen, his face a mask of horror and shame and something else I couldn't quite name. Dean Hartwell met me at the stairs, offering his hand to help me up. "Thank you for letting me do this," he whispered. I just nodded, not trusting my voice. On stage, under the bright sunshine with thousands of eyes on me, he presented me with a plaque and an envelope. "This is a scholarship fund," he explained to the audience. "Established in Margaret's name by contributions from faculty and staff, it will provide full tuition for one student each year whose parent works in facilities services at Westfield, so that no other parent has to choose between their pride and their child's future." The applause was deafening, but I wasn't looking at the audience. I was looking at my son, at the boy I'd raised and the man he'd become and the child he still was underneath all that fear and pride. His friends were leaning over to him, saying something. One clapped him on the shoulder, another looked shocked, and David was crying. Not quiet tears, but the kind of sobbing that shakes your whole body. The kind of grief that comes from realizing you've hurt the person who loved you most in the world. When the applause finally died down, Dean Hartwell handed me the microphone. "I could talk about sacrifice," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I could talk about the years I spent mopping floors and emptying trash so my son could sit in those classrooms I cleaned. I could talk about the nights I cried myself to sleep, wondering if I was doing enough, being enough, giving enough." I paused, looking directly at David. "But what I want to talk about is shame. Not my shame. I've never been ashamed of honest work or of doing what needed to be done. I'm talking about the shame we sometimes feel about where we come from, about the people who raised us, about the sacrifices that were made so we could stand here today." Several students were crying now. I could see parents reaching for tissues. "My son asked me not to come today. He was embarrassed by me, ashamed that his mother was a janitor while his friends' parents were doctors and lawyers. And you know what? I understand. I understand the pressure to fit in, to be like everyone else, to hide the parts of your story that don't match the narrative you want to tell." David was trying to stand now, but his friends were holding him back. "But here's what I need all of you to understand. Your value doesn't come from your job title. It doesn't come from the size of your house or the brand of your clothes or the school you attended. Your value comes from how you treat people, from the kindness you show to those who can't do anything for you, from the respect you give to the janitor cleaning your classroom, the waitress serving your food, the construction worker building your future." I held up the plaque. "I don't need an award to know my worth. I've known it every day for the past 4 years, every time I walked through those doors at 5 a.m. and did my job with pride. But maybe some of you needed to be reminded that the people you don't see, the ones whose work makes your life possible, are just as valuable as you are. Maybe more valuable, because we understand something you're just learning. Dignity isn't given, it's earned. And it has nothing to do with what you do, and everything to do with who you are." I handed the microphone back to Dean Hartwell. The applause was thunderous, but I barely heard it. I was walking down the stage stairs, back toward my seat, when I heard it. "Mom!" David was running, actually running in his graduation robe, pushing past students and faculty, tripping over chairs. People moved aside as he came toward me, this grown man in tears, and when he reached me, he fell to his knees right there on the grass. "I'm sorry," he sobbed. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." I looked down at him, at this boy I'd raised, and for a moment I felt nothing. Just a cold, vast emptiness where my heart had been. He'd hurt me so deeply, had denied me so completely. How could I forgive that? But then I saw it. Not the man he'd become, but the child he'd been. The 6-year-old hugging me after his soccer game. The 12-year-old winning 3rd place at the science fair. The 16-year-old crying tears of joy when I told him we'd saved enough for college applications. That boy was still in there, buried under fear and insecurity, and the desperate need to belong. I put my hand on his head, the way I used to when he was small and afraid of the dark. "Get up," I said quietly. "Get up and finish your graduation. We'll talk after." "No." He looked up at me, his face wet and broken. "No, I need to say this now, in front of everyone, because they need to know. They need to know who you are, and what you did, and how wrong I was." He stood but kept holding my hand, and then he turned to face the audience. 3,000 people watching this moment, this public reckoning. "My name is David Chen," he said, his voice cracking, "and this is my mother. She worked as a janitor at this university so I could attend. She cleaned the bathrooms in the dorms where I lived. She mopped the floors in the buildings where I studied. And I pretended I didn't know her because I was ashamed. The silence was absolute. I told my friends she wasn't my mother. I avoided her in the hallways. I asked her not to come to my graduation because I didn't want anyone to see her. And she came anyway. Because that's what mothers do. They love you even when you don't deserve it. They show up even when they're not wanted. They sacrifice everything and expect nothing in return. He turned back to me, still holding my hand. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't deserve to call you Mom, but I'm asking anyway because I finally understand what you've been trying to teach me my whole life. That the measure of a person isn't where they come from or what they do for a living, it's how they love. And Mom, you loved me better than I ever knew how to love you back. I couldn't speak. The tears I'd been holding back for weeks, months, years were finally falling. I pulled him into my arms, this man-child who was still learning how to be human, and held him while he cried. When we finally pulled apart, the entire audience was on their feet, not applauding, just standing in witness to this moment, this reconciliation. Dean Hartwell was crying. Professor Chen was crying. Even some of David's friends were wiping their eyes. We walked back to our seats together, mother and son, and we stayed like that for the rest of the ceremony. When they called his name and he walked across that stage to receive his diploma, he didn't pose for photos with his friends afterward. He came straight back to me, in his graduation robe with his diploma in hand, and asked if we could go home. Of course, I said. Let me grab my things. No. He took my hand again. I mean home, our home, the apartment. I want to have dinner at the kitchen table where you helped me with my homework for 18 years. I want to sleep in my old bed and wake up to your coffee and spend tomorrow helping you clean the apartment like I used to do when I was little. I want to come home, Mom, really home, not just visiting, home. That night, we sat at our kitchen table eating leftovers from the refrigerator. David told me about his job offers, his plans for the future, but more than that, he told me about his fears. About feeling like an imposter among his wealthy classmates. About being terrified that people would find out he was the poor kid on scholarship. About how he'd tried so hard to reinvent himself that he'd lost sight of who he actually was. I wanted to be someone you could be proud of, he said. Baby, I replied, I've always been proud of you, not because of your grades or your job offers or your fancy friends. I was proud of you when you were 6 and you shared your lunch with a kid who forgot his. I was proud when you were 13 and you stood up to bullies picking on a smaller kid. I was proud every time you chose kindness over cruelty, honesty over convenience. That's the son I raised. Not the one who denied me in a hallway, but the one who just knelt on the grass in front of 3,000 people and told the truth. He reached across the table and took my hand. I'm going to do better. I'm going to be better. I know you are. How do you know? Because, I said, squeezing his hand, you're your father's son, and he was the best man I ever knew. 3 months later, I did something I'd been too afraid to do for 20 years. I went back to accounting. Not at a big firm like before, but at a small nonprofit that provided financial services to low-income families. David helped me update my resume, practice for interviews, prepare for the transition. You should have done this years ago, he said. I wasn't ready years ago. I needed to finish raising you first. You could have done both. Maybe. But I don't regret my choices, David. Every path I took led me here. Led us here. I still see my former colleagues from Westfield sometimes. They stop me in the grocery store or the coffee shop and tell me about the scholarship fund, about the students it's helping. Last year, 3 children of janitors attended Westfield. Next year, they expect 5. David visits every Sunday. He brings his laundry sometimes, and I don't mind doing it because it means he's here, sitting at the kitchen table, telling me about his week. He's working at a consulting firm now, doing well. But more importantly, he volunteers twice a month teaching financial literacy at a youth center in a low-income neighborhood. Paying it forward, he tells me. Or paying it back, I suggest. He thinks about this. Both, maybe. One evening, about a year after graduation, he brought someone home for dinner. A young woman named Sarah, smart and funny and kind. At one point during the meal, she asked what I did for a living. Before I could answer, David jumped in. My mom's an accountant at a nonprofit, but before that she worked as a janitor at Westfield University so I could afford to go there. She's the strongest person I know. There was no shame in his voice, no hesitation, just pride. Pure, uncomplicated pride in the woman who raised him. Sarah looked at me with new respect. That must have been incredibly difficult. It was, I said honestly, but it was also incredibly worth it. After dinner, David walked Sarah to her car, then came back inside. I was doing the dishes when he wrapped his arms around me from behind, the way he used to when he was small enough to fit under my chin. "Thank you," he whispered. "For dinner? It was nothing special. No, thank you for not giving up on me. For showing up even when I didn't want you there. For teaching me the difference between shame and pride. For everything." I turned to face him, this man who was still my little boy, and I saw in his eyes the person I'd always known he could be. Not perfect, not without flaws or fears, but good. Fundamentally, deeply good. "You're welcome," I said. "Now go catch up to that girl. She seems nice." "She is nice," he agreed. I told her about the graduation, about what I did and what you said. I wanted her to know from the beginning who I am and where I come from. And what did she say? He smiled. She said, "Anyone raised by a woman like you must be worth getting to know." After he left, I finished the dishes and sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. The apartment was quiet, but it wasn't the lonely quiet I'd lived with for so long. It was peaceful. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you've done your job well, that you've raised a human being who will go out into the world and maybe make it a little bit better. I thought about James, wondered what he would think of the man his son had become. I liked to imagine he'd be proud, not of the job or the degree or the success, but of the growth, of the courage it took to admit you were wrong and the strength it took to change. Sometimes people ask me if I regret those 4 years working as a janitor, if I wish I'd found another way, an easier path. And I tell them the truth. I don't regret a single moment, because those years taught me something I couldn't have learned any other way. Dignity isn't about what you do, it's about who you are when no one's watching. It's about showing up even when you're not wanted. It's about loving people through their worst moments and believing in them until they learn to believe in themselves. And sometimes, just sometimes, that love is enough to transform shame into pride, denial into acknowledgement, and a broken relationship into something even stronger than it was before. My son learned that lesson in front of 3,000 people on a sunny graduation day, but really I'd been teaching it to him his whole life. It just took him a while to understand. That's okay. The best lessons always take time to sink in, and I had nothing but time, nothing but love. Nothing but faith that the boy I raised would eventually become the man I always knew he could be. And he did.